Hello, boys and girls. So now we're getting ready to start chapter 9 of The Clay Marble by Mingfong Ho. And when we left off, something terrible happened to baby, which was he got hurt and he needs to go to the hospital. And so Dara is really afraid because she now has to go try to find her family all by herself. And she feels lost and alone. And it's because John too is going with the baby to the hospital and they need to find their families. So Dara is getting ready to set off. But before she left, John too, she was made a magic marble by John too that is supposed to help her and to give her courage and strength. And so let's pick up with chapter 9. Here we go. Chapter 9. I kept walking even after the sun had set. The sky was still tinkling with gold, but I knew that soon everything would be swallowed up in darkness, and I would have to stop searching for my family. I had managed to retrace part of the way we had come earlier that afternoon, but I was nowhere near where our campsite had been. In the fading light, I could make out the silhouettes of all the tall watchtowers in the distance, rising on their bamboo stilts above the desolate plains. I kept heading toward them, since they marked where the Nongchan camp officially began. It was already dark when I reached the watchtowers. Scattered campfires had been lit near them, as if other people found it reassuring to be sheltering near these landmarks. Families gathered quietly around the fires, sorting out their belongings or bedding down for the night. Many others had not even bothered to build a fire, but were just huddled on the ground, sleeping under the open sky. For a while I wandered from fire to fire, searching the faces of the people reflected in the firelight for someone I knew, but there was not a familiar face among them. I noticed an old man looking at me curiously. He was sitting with his own family, holding a plate of cold rice. I looked at it hungrily, but could not bring myself to ask for any food. The old man smiled at me kindly. Ask him, I told myself, if not for food, at least for some directions. I took a step toward him, then hesitated. What would I ask? I wondered what Mother was doing now. Of course, she would be worried about me, I thought, but at least she would be with Saroon and Nia and Grandpa Kem. I imagined her stroking the embers of a cooking fire, at that very moment thinking of me. And perhaps Grandpa Kem, Saroon, and Nia would be sitting nearby, staring silently into the flames. Just imagining them all made me feel lonely. On the twilight horizon, a crescent moon was rising. I watched it hook onto a branch right above me and dangled there, like a new sickle blade gleaming in the darkening sky. If only I could climb up to this tree to the moon, I thought drowsily, and curl up against its smooth curve. How comfortable I'd be tonight. Or I could hang onto it as it swept across the night sky and search down far below for my mother. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I will go on looking. Tomorrow, I will find them. For now, the tree in front of me looked old and solid. I leaned against it, pressing my cheek against its rough bark. It seemed as good a place as any to rest. So I lay down under it and felt for Jantu's marble in my shirt pocket. It was there, smooth and round, reassuring. I took it out, and, with it in my hand, fell asleep. It was dawn when I woke up. A cool morning breeze was blowing, and I shivered, rubbing the goosebumps from my bare arms. And then I got up and stretched. I was cold and hungry, but I felt a certain pride that I had survived the night alone, with only the clay marble for company. Maybe Jantu's magic is working, I thought. Maybe the magic in the marble is making me stronger and more sure of myself. Quickly, I checked my pocket to make sure I had put it back, and then, taking a deep breath, I started to walk on again. Already there were people up and about, many of them packing their bundles of clothes, ready to move on. I picked my way through them. I felt as if I were just about invisible for all the attention anyone was paying me. I heard a group of men talking about the shelling yesterday, and I lingered there, eavesdropping on their conversation. While what I heard was disturbing. The shelling was expected to start again today. Someone said, except that today it might be coming from the other direction, from the west and aimed at the east. Would that be Thailand shooting back at the Vietnamese? Or perhaps the various anti-Vietnamese Khmer factions shooting at each other? The men discussed this at length, but nobody seemed to have any clearer sense of what to do than I did. What everybody did seem convinced about was that the fields here at Nong Chan would be unsafe for at least the next few days, maybe longer, and that we should seek shelter elsewhere. But where? Some talked about walking back into Thailand, perhaps toward the protected, more established refugee camps, like Khao Ai Dang. Others talked of joining one of the military base camps scattered deep in the forest beyond Nong Chan. Listening to all this, I felt a stab of fear. If I didn't find the stone beam, it would be even harder to meet up with my family, as the continued shelling would be scattered us yet farther apart. I had to find them, and soon. But how? I noticed that the kind old man who had smiled at me the night before was among the group of men I had just been listening to. Sitting a little off to the side, he was eating some cold rice out of a small woven basket. Slowly I approached him. He looked up at me and beckoned for me to come over. "Where's your family, child?" he asked. I don't know," I said. He shook his head sadly. "Got separated from them during the shelling yesterday, did you?" I thought so. "Look, I don't have much rice left. Take this." He held out the last bit of rice in his basket to me and said, "If you're hungry, why don't you try waiting for the lunch truck?" Of course, the lunch truck. Why hadn't I thought of that before? The lunch truck was one of the very few things around that had its own set routines and destinations. People, especially children, would know where it stopped. I could ask for directions to the signpost with the red 3 painted on it. From there, I could easily find my way back to the stone beam. "Thank you," I said to the old man, taking a handful of sticky rice. And as I turned away, I also silently thanked the magic marble for showing me the way. People were still in a state of flux, looking for their old campsites or for some place safer. I asked the first child I saw for directions to the lunch truck stop and got them. I started walking, continuing to ask children along the way for further directions. By early afternoon, I had managed to find my way to the truck stop where Jeantu and I had so often lined up for our lunch. The wooden signpost with the red 3 was still standing, although there wasn't a single child waiting at it. I barely paused there. Everything was starting to look familiar. Almost running, I headed past the well. Forgotten were my hunger and my sore feet. I wanted only to get home and throw myself into Mother's waiting arms. Should I slow down and creep up to surprise Mother and Saroon? Or should I just keep running and shout to get their attention? I could hardly keep from laughing out loud as I ran the last stretch home. Suddenly, I stopped. There was nothing there. The flat landscape stretched out, bleak and familiar, but there was no ox cart parked there, no laundry flapping nearby, no hammock strung under it. There was no campfire, no tarpaulin sheet draped over bags of rice and tools, and there was no one from my family. They must be nearby, I thought. Desperately, I tried to find Mother or Saroon in this scattered crowd of people. A mistake, I thought. I must have made a mistake again. I was at the wrong spot after all. I would have to keep looking further. I glanced around trying to get my bearings. It was then that I saw our old stone beam half jutted out of the mud, and to one side of it, our toy village, or what was left of it. The puddle that Jeantu and I pretended was Tonle Sap Lake was still there, but the houses were gone, trampled into the mud. I walked over to the puddle and knelt down. From the mud I pulled up a twig that I recognized as our lemon tree. The tiny clay beads that we had hung on it had dissolved, and the twig itself was broken. I tried to stick it back into the mud, but it wouldn't stand. Fragments of the dolls, now only bits of hardened clay, were scattered nearby. I crouched over the broken clay dolls and tried to piece a few of them together, but I couldn't even tell which pieces were part of which dolls anymore. There was a scrap of cloth that had been Nia's doll's sarong, and a pair of tiny clasped hands that had linked the Saroon doll to the Nia doll, but nothing else was even recognizable. I laid my cheek down on the sun-warmed stone and pressed against the carved pattern on it. The carving on this one stone had survived 1,000 years, I told myself. What does it matter that your silly clay dolls didn't make it through the night? I closed my eyes, but the tears trickled out just the same, until my cheeks were cool and slippery against the stone. And that's the end of our chapter 9. We'll pick up with chapter 10 next.